Alright, so it is time to get ourselves a bit. Wait. Okay, I forgot yeah. Alright, so it's time to get ourselves a baseline, and in the spirit of keeping things relatively simple, I am going to add yet another 3x oscillator. Let's get that bass channel pattern, whatever. And, okay, I'm going to turn everything down again except for this right here. Wait, I'm also going to lower this an octave, so down to minus 12 semitones. Okay, that is, so what we're going to want to do is set this to mono mode right over here. And this makes it so that you can't, like, hit multiple notes at the same time. Like, if you look down here, like, I'm hitting multiple notes, but it won't let me play more than one at the same time with it off. It's just like you usually don't want that to happen. Like, this just makes it a little bit easier so we don't accidentally hit two notes while we're like messing around with it. Oh, apparently an FL Studio 12 slide is on by default, so you hear that as opposed to... Okay, yeah, you can, like, if I turn it all the way up like that, you can hear what I'm talking about. But, I'm gonna turn this off for this because, I don't know, I just don't really want my bass line sliding all over the place. If I want a slide note, then I can just put in a slide note by itself. Usually when I put in slide stuff like this, it's like for lead kind of things, so like... Like, you know, that kind of stuff that sounds better than... like, that's what my whistle synth over here is doing, so that's why I have it like that. But for the bass line, I'm going to keep slide off. Alright, so we have a bass here. But it sounds a little bit plain, because, I mean, it is literally just a sine wave. And that can work for certain tracks, but for ours, I think it's a little boring. I think we need something with a little more edge to it. I'm talking triangles. Alright, so that sounds pretty good for the purpose of this song, but it's still kind of plain. It's like, it's got no body to it. Like... This right here is, I mean, it says bass right there. This is where you really like hear the notes of the bass, but it's like it's got no thickness to it. There's nothing down in this whole sub-region. So I'm going to add another oscillator, keep this one on sine wave, and keep it at the negative 24 semitones that it is at by default. And now we got a real bass right here. So now we got our triangle and our sine wave both at minus 12 up here. And then another backup sine all the way down here, giving some more body to the whole thing. Now a lot of times you may want to add just a separate sub bass entirely. A good way to do that is to just use 3x oscillator and like turn down everything except one, and then keep it on here and then turn it all the way down here. And you can layer that with whatever other normal bass you want. But I am going to use 3x oscillator itself as its own bass, so I'm going to keep to what I had a second ago. So now it's basically two basses in one. It's got its own normal bass with the sine plus triangle wave up here, but it also has the sub bass down here going along with everything it does. Of course, not every song needs a sub bass, and some songs can be better with only a sub bass, and some songs don't need a bass at all. So just figure out what works best for whatever you're making. I also encourage you to experiment with different oscillator shapes. So like, for instance, if you want a little more growl, you may replace your triangle with a perhaps somewhat quieter square wave. And that can get a pretty nice looking... I keep, like, saying things look when they sound. Please help me. Alright, it's time to actually start writing things, though. Now, when you're writing your bass line, you are going to want to make sure you're doing things that kind of complement your main instruments. So, like, I could just do something like... or like maybe those notes exactly, but you know what I mean, just like whole notes kind of going along with what the chords are, even though that's not what the chords are. But this song is a lot more like spastic than that, so I don't think that's enough. That's too boring for this. That can work for certain songs, but not this one. So I'm gonna try to sort of mimic the melody almost, but like while not using the exact same notes. So like, something like that. Okay, like I'm still working on it obviously, but just something that sort of supports and complements everything on top of it, because that's generally what a bass is supposed to do. I will probably make another video going into this in more detail at a later date, because there is a lot that can be said about this, but for now I'm just gonna see what I can do and try to explain that I'm doing the best I can. I'm mostly gonna, so like this is the range we actually want it in. But I'm gonna be playing an octave higher, just because it's a lot easier to like hear the notes, because like down here, if I'm playing things like all the way down here, it's like, it can just be very hard to actually tell like what I'm doing and hear if it sounds good or not, but if it's up here, it's like, it's a lot more obvious. So I usually write bass lines an octave higher and then pitch them all down afterwards. Okay, time to actually start writing though. I usually do bass lines last because I have a hard time figuring out what notes to use, but once I have like the rest of the song down, or at least the chords, then suddenly I'm like restricted to only using notes that sound good with those chords, and that makes things a bit easier for me. So then I just focus on trying to make a good sort of, you kind of have to treat it almost like a counter melody, or at least in these kinds of things where you want to have a dynamic bass line, you kind of have to just make sure everything blends well with the main parts of the song, and nothing's like too boring but also not too distracting either. This is just what I tend to do though. Everyone's different. Like I think Michael Jackson said that he tended to start with bass lines, and that obviously worked pretty well for him. So like that might be something worth experimenting with, depending on what kind of music you're going for. But this is just kind of how things ended up going for this song. So I initially imagined something like this. But this is pretty much exactly the same as like this synth thing over here. Like not exactly, but I want to differentiate it just a little bit more. Let me move this down here. Something like that maybe. See how that sounds. Okay, it's still actually a little hard to hear how this sounds with the rest of the songs. I'm gonna make it a little bit more easy to like... So obviously that doesn't sound very good with the rest of the song, especially with that other 3x oscillator synth going on, but it's a lot easier to at least hear the notes. So I'm gonna do something like this for now and then change it back to a sine wave when I'm done figuring out what the notes are gonna be. Okay, so next lesson, if you don't feel like you're really getting anywhere, it is okay to take a break, because I definitely do not feel like I'm getting anywhere right now. So I'm gonna come back to this a little bit later. Like my sister's bedroom floor still isn't finished yet. I should probably help her a little bit with this first. Okay, that's probably enough for now.
2 days later.
Oh god, that's right, I still need to finish this. You know, these videos are getting like 5 views. I cannot summon the motivation to like give this a proper baseline. I'm just gonna like cheat. So like what if I just kinda like like something like that, maybe? Okay, so yeah, I will probably be making a future video about how to make like actual good bass lines, but this is how you make one when you're lazy. Like you just do like... like just do whole octaves basically, and like throw in some other things where they work, like right here. Usually like when you're holding your hand on like a keyboard like this, like hold on, like this note right here where your index finger would generally lie, like the thing right in the middle of them, it's like, you know, the thing that just kind of makes that sort of noise. You can throw some of those in there if you want. Sometimes you can get away with other stuff, but usually it takes a little bit more careful planning if you're trying to do anything fancy, which I am too lazy to do right now. There we go. We made a song. I don't feel like doing a bass over here. This video is gonna get like 5 views. I honestly just don't care. Okay, I should at least like make sure I go over like everything though, just in case. So I am going to go into the mixing like while we're here. These kinds of songs don't usually require a whole lot of mixing because it's just like sound fonts. Like you don't need to. It's just Super Nintendo noises. I mean, you can, depending on like what you're using, but usually when like instruments are this simple, they usually blend fairly well together unless you're like using a bunch of stuff that all occupy unless you're using like a bunch of stuff that all occupy the same frequency range. But I am going to do a little bit to this bass though because it's kind of, I don't know, we could make it a little bit better. I'm going to put this on a mixer channel over here, and I'm going to add a fruity parametric EQ too. And I'm going to kind of play around with this stuff and boost and lower certain frequencies, so... And if you want to give it more oomph, you can kind of boost like this range a little bit, but be careful because you do not want... Okay, so a good range for most of your instruments is around like -8. Like between the 6 and the 9 here is usually a decent range. I mean, it depends on the full song and how complex it is. Like if there aren't a whole lot of instruments, then you can have each individual thing higher, and if there's a ton of instruments all going on at once, then you're going to want to make things a little bit lower. But on average, usually a good idea to keep it around there. So just like you're usually going to want to, like, instead of boosting things, like lower them down when you're trying to mix things together. But I mean, I'm not a sound engineer. I just if it sounds like it works, I do it. Hold on. Alright, so basically I'm just raising the bass frequencies and the upper things so it has like slight more growl to it, almost like we used a triangle, or I mean a square wave, but we're not using a square wave because I just don't like how that sounds for this particular song. And to compensate, I lowered some of this stuff. I am not an expert. There are experts who have made videos on this kind of stuff. Go look them up if you're curious. But this works for my purposes, in this at least. So like, you can disable plugins up here so you can hear what they sound like before and after. It's just, it has a little more, well, obviously bass to it because we raised the bass slightly, but also a little bit more clarity because we raised the higher range where you can kind of hear the notes a little bit more easily, so it like cuts through a little bit more. Like, it's pretty subtle because I don't want to go too overboard on this, but yeah. Like, if I really wanted to get into this, what I might do is something like take the steel drum and put it on like its own thing. Wait, over here, yeah. And put another parametric EQ on it, and then like kind of listen to like where it sounds best, and then like boost or lower certain frequencies. And maybe for this synth, I would maybe like raise the frequencies a little bit lower than where the steel drum's being raised, and then like lower the frequencies of those down here. So the steel drum might look like this, and then that thing might look like this a little bit, so that they kind of duck out of each other's way a little bit more. But I honestly don't think that's very necessary for this particular song, so I'm just kind of not going to bother. But that's like a brief preview of what you might be doing if you get into this in like a more complex kind of song. Alright, so we sort of made a song. I mean, if this were to be extended into like a full-length song, this would probably be only like the first third of it. It'd probably come out to like right here at least. But I mean, for the purposes of the tutorial, I would say this is a good enough showcase of like all the different things that you need to go into a particular song. So let's give the full thing a listen. Okay, the bass was a little bit loud there actually, so I just turned it down at the last second, but there we go, tutorial's over. Just throw a guitar amp onto the master channel, I don't care. End of video, goodbye.